Hi, Cole here from Storytelling with Data. Today, I'd like to share with you one of my favorite strategies for low-tech planning, storyboarding. I think of a storyboard in a business setting as simply a visual plan of attack for the content you're going to create. And this is before you create any content, which is a critical part of all of this. Because I think it's very easy when we finish a project or complete an analysis to jump straight to our tools and start creating slides, which is understandable. It feels really productive. But when we do that without a clear plan of attack, our slide decks have a way of getting away from us. Actually, it's after we finish a project or an analysis, that's the perfect point at which to pause and slow down just a beat so that we can make that plan of attack. And now, planning in this low-tech manner, or pausing at that point of the process, used to be a part of the process that had to happen because getting data into a graph or information onto a slide took such tools, such experts, that we had to get it right on pen and paper, typically, first. Today, though, as I mentioned, that often doesn't happen. We go straight to PowerPoint or Keynote or substitute in your application of choice, and we start creating. Challenge with that is we feel like what we create has to answer every question that might come up. So we just start making slides. And I might make a slide and another slide. And we did an analysis kind of like that last quarter. Let's grab those slides. I know my audience is going to want to see this handful of slides, so let's put that in. And we can end up with this massive deck that may not actually serve our audience, our message, the action that we need to have happen. So if that is a cycle that sounds at all familiar, storyboarding is a strategy that can help you break out of that, which is before you turn to your tools, you start low tech with pen and paper, a whiteboard, sticky notes, one of my favorite tools for storyboarding. They are small, which forces me to be concise with my ideas. They lend themselves to being easily rearranged so I can explore different narrative flows. It's also something interesting that happens when we do work in our machines that causes us to form attachment to what we've done. Sometimes to the extent that even if we know it could be better or should be changed, we resist doing so because of the work it's taken us to get the thing where it is. For example, if I've just spent 3 hours creating the most beautiful graph on the most beautiful slide, and we're walking through it together, and we get to this one, and you say to me, Cole, I don't think that one's so relevant. Let's actually just push that back to the appendix. That feels bad. There are feelings of loss associated with that. There's actual loss associated with that when we consider the 3 hours of work that it took me to make the beautiful graph on the beautiful slide. Whereas if I'm sketching things out in a low-tech manner, and I've put my ideas down on sticky notes and we're walking through that storyboard and we get to a particular one and decide, not relevant, and we discard it, it's not the same feeling of loss involved. It's also not that 3 hours of work that is lost. So 2 points here. One is to storyboard, and secondly is to do so in a low-tech fashion. When I storyboard, which I do before I'm going to be talking through or building material for anything for the first time, or even if it's just I want to attack something through a different lens, I break my process into 3 discrete steps. First step is to brainstorm. And this is a cathartic part of the process for me because I get my stack of sticky notes and I just start writing down ideas. And these might be ideas for slides or data or other context that's going to come into my presentation or my document. And I can just let the ideas flow. It's a way of getting everything out from up here out into the world where I can see ideas and consider them and decide whether and where they fit and how they help me get my message across to my audience. And at that point, you can let it be a just flowing process. You don't need to discriminate of, will something make it into the final deck, or what order do things go in? Just let it be a natural process. You don't actually have to spend a ton of time here. 5 or 10 minutes brainstorming and getting the ideas out of your head is usually going to give you enough content to start to play with. And that brings us to the second step, which is to edit. And this I think of as rearranging, arranging, adding things in, taking things away, stepping back and considering for your audience and for what you need to have happen, what plan is going to help you get there, both in terms of what it contains, but then also the order in which you go through content. And so at this point, I like to have all of my sticky notes out in front of me where I can see them. And I start moving them around, grouping together things that might fit together. I also, at this point, always start a discard pile, which I think is maybe the single most useful part of the storyboarding process. As I mentioned before, when we jump straight to our tools, often there's this idea that what we create needs to answer every question that might come up. Whereas when we storyboard, specifically with our message and our audience in mind, we can ask ourselves, for every bit of content we consider whether we want to include it, does this help me achieve that ultimate goal? And if it doesn't, right, it might still be relevant or interesting, but if it's not serving the purpose of the given communication, I can discard it. And I'll find for myself, sometimes I'll write down the same idea or variants of it a number of times and discard it a number of times, because it takes that process for me to convince myself that it might be interesting, or maybe I worked really hard on that piece of things, but it doesn't serve my purpose for my audience. So in this editing process, you want to be ruthless when it comes to that, because it's that process of discarding that actually helps what remain really be key and focused and relevant to what you need to have happen, both for you and for your audience. So this part of the process takes a little bit more time. And sometimes I'll find that I'll edit and arrange once and then take a step away, go for a walk, or turn my attention to something else for a bit of time, and then go back to it with fresh eyes where I can continue to rearrange and consider how I'm going to transition from one piece to the next. Talking through your plan of attack out loud at this point can be very helpful for that. And if you're stumbling over things, it might mean you need a transition bit of content or that you want to rearrange further. After you have a plan of attack that you are happy with, comes the third step of the process, which is to then solicit feedback from someone else. And for this, you can caveat, this is rough. I just want to walk you through my plan of attack and vet that it makes sense. Great if you can do this with a manager or a stakeholder, so you can get feedback at this early stage that either confirms, yes, this is the right plan of attack, start executing, or no, let's actually go in this other direction. When you can get that feedback without having to create an entire finalized deck first, can save a ton of time. And so as a manager or stakeholder or someone who is giving feedback, asking to see progress at this early stage can also be useful. And another reason that low tech is important here is because it focuses people really on the structure and the logic of the overarching communication versus design details. So as soon as we put something into our tools and we start to make it look nice, or even if we don't, that's oftentimes where feedback gets focused, which is also useful, but at a later stage. So talk through someone, it can also just be a friend or a colleague, through your plan of attack. Let them ask questions as you do, because that conversation that ensues will help you further refine your storyboard. This, by the way, is a part of the process that if you haven't been routinely doing it, feels like it slows you down. And it does a little, but it doesn't take long. Usually 5 or 10 minutes brainstorming, another 10 or 20 minutes arranging and editing, then getting some feedback on that. So you figure in less than an hour, you now have a fully vetted plan of attack. And what that does is it helps keep you on track through the rest of the process, which means oftentimes, given that discard pile that we talked about, you are creating shorter, more focused decks. And so then with the rest of the process, you have more time now to make the content of those shorter decks really effective. So it's been a quick summary of storyboarding and the power of it. I'll just encourage you, if you would like to learn more and see examples, Chapter 3 of Storytelling with You focuses entirely on this process. Really takes you through the steps, shows a number of examples so you can see how that looks in the real world. Also draw your attention to an exercise we have in the Storytelling with Data community on storyboarding your project. So if you'd like somewhere to look for some written guidance that will help you through this process, and then you can also share your storyboard there and any questions you have. We'll make sure we put the links to all of that in the description below. And actually, speaking of questions, I'd love to hear your experience with storyboarding and any questions you have. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts and questions. And with that, thanks very much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.